All right, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the AWOL concept, the breakthrough of creating this AWOL practice that Whitehall has really been known for at least over 15 years. And the concept's pretty simple: creating a practice that runs without the owner, that still drives the same bottom line, if not more, than when you were there practicing, through associates. A practice that also runs without you means one that you can leave for a month and just check in over the phone with your leadership, and it still does well. So over the last couple of years, obviously there's a lot of things have happened in the marketplace, a lot of changes, with staffing and driving up costs of different things, and finding associates. This is going to be our topic today, is really all the different changes that we see and how that affects this concept of the AWOL practice. So first, Greg, I want you to kind of comment on, do you see this becoming more challenging in the future with all these, all these things going on? We talked about a tough economy and inflation. Is this something that worries you for practices that have the associate concept or are actually moving in that direction?
Good question. You know what, we've kind of come to the conclusion as we watch this, that as the economy gets tougher, inflation goes up, staff are hard to find, all of these things, staff are expensive, there's less room for sloppiness. For example, we do marketing, that we spend money on marketing. How we handle the phone call determines whether we get 40% in the door or 80 or 90% in the door. Once they get there, whether they buy dentistry, whether they buy most of their dentistry, are they happy enough to refer? Do they stay in the practice? In the past, anything that came in contact with the owner doctor tended to work out. The owner doctor could get patients to buy, kind of inspire them to refer. But now in the AWOL practice, the associate practice where the staff are kind of driving the bus, we've got to do everything right. We're so interdependent in the AWOL model. One superstar staff person isn't going to pull it across the line. We're not going to get the profit we're looking for. So that is something that has changed. Now, here's the good news. Most people had enough slack to begin with that they can take up some slack, and they've got a great practice keeping 15 or 20% of the net of what associates produce. In medicine, they got to where their profits got thin. They brought in physician's assistants to dilute the doctor's time. In other words, they kept trying things till finally they ran out of rope. In dentistry, we still have some rope, but it means we got to get better. Everybody's got to get better. The bad thing is, my saying this comes at a time when most practices aren't getting better. They got a bunch of new staff who are almost in charge. They're so hard to find, hard to keep them there long enough to train them. They're almost running the show, and they're not bringing the kind of culture that makes an associate successful.
So does this, when you say all that stuff, the first thing that I think, and I'm sure a lot of doctors are thinking the same thing, does this affect the net? Economy, inflation, staff costs going bananas. Are you seeing this really affect the practice's net right now?
You'd think so. With staff costs going up, staff costs are being driven almost by hidden factors. Yeah, there's inflation, but there's something else that came out of COVID where staff, I saw a study last month that showed 91% of businesses, this isn't practices, 91% of businesses ran ads they got no response for. In other words, it's getting very tough to get people through the door, trained or untrained, trained or otherwise. So yeah, that would tend to put you on your back foot. However, if we can get a grip as doctors, as practice managers, on the whole concept of profitability, and most people just think it's raise your prices or sell more services, sell everybody a bite guard. It's so much more complex than that. Each market will handle certain things. For example, I saw a doctor in South Carolina. He worked out of 6 operatories, saw a zillion patients, saw 200 new patients a month, and he did incredibly well with his net selling small cases. You naturally think that the go-to is big cases, big cosmetics. There's these people out here that they have so much money, they just want to spend it on their teeth. There's a few of those. Hard to make a life out of it though. So you need to understand there's a lot of components that go into profitability. Staff cost is just one of them. How productive staff are. Does it take 12 staff or 14 to get the job done? That's probably as big a factor as anything. Your prices, you got to stay within certain boundaries, or you literally end up spending just that much more in marketing a bunch of weaker patients into the practice where we need even stronger staff. So you need to understand how these things work. But the answer is yes, people who understand the complexity of profitability, this current set of problems we're being dealt are absolutely within their range. It's not a problem at all. They just got to tighten up a few things.
And what about new doctors? So a lot of people kind of fear the new doctors coming on, because those are the ones that tend to be available to our offices, people that are just graduating or certainly over the last 5 years. And their ability and their mindset is completely different than our doctors that graduated in the 80s or even the 70s. Just had a completely different thought process on business and making money. And you got this new generation of people that really don't want to make money like the old graduating doctors did. Is that something you worry about? Is that something that you see play out in offices?
Sure, it's something I've heard you talk about, where the case average, the average production per new patient with an associate doctor, without some training, motivation, and really some focus, they end up doing like 1/3 of what the owner doctor does on a new patient. And when you consider that you buy a new patient through marketing at a cost of $150 to $250, we're going to pay roughly 25 or 30% to the associate and then have him underproduce dramatically. Right. It's hard to come out on that without really knowing what you're up against. In fact, honestly, Wes, up to this point in my life, I realized that anybody you talk to that we hadn't worked with intensely, that had an associate, had a tendency to either lose money and walk away from the relationship or give them the practice. It tended to be one or the other. Either the associate walked away or the owner walked away.
And what tends to be the common mistakes?
Well, they go into it thinking, I've got too many new patients, I'm ready for an associate. A lot of people think that, at least they're considering those things. And what they find is when the associate arrives, all those patients were referred and he was selling a ton of dentistry to them, the owner was, and now they don't want to see the associate. So he turns to marketing, spending that several $100s I talked about. The associate not really sure what to say in case presentation, tends to confuse them, and very little comes out of it except overhead. And so there was a lot of heartbreak with that. So let me tell you what we learned to put some real rebar in the cement. And that was the first thing. If a doctor has hopes of the owner pulling back and working less, we've got to have a leadership team. And I'll explain why I use that term in a second. They've got to have a leadership team to keep things running, to keep a subtle, effective pressure on the associate doctor to turn in a good day's production and watch the costs and all of those things. So it's about leadership. If you think you're going to step away from a practice and have one or several associates just kind of meander their way across the goal line, you're probably going to be disappointed. I say leadership team because even that requires its checks and balances. We have a clinic administrator that we train up to what we call the growth engineer level. That's where they literally know how to pull the levers to make a practice grow, but they need to be supported by team leaders at the front desk, hygiene, and chairside. It's those team leaders that balance out, it's the House of Representatives, the Senate, the executive branch, all of that. It's the same thing. We balance it all out. We train people up. If the clinic administrator decides to quit, we have somebody already mostly trained to do the job. It's just a few weeks before we have somebody ready to step in. So leadership is the key to AWOL. With leadership and probably some kind of incentive program, both for them and incentives for the staff.
Now, a lot of our doctors don't have incentives or tried them, and they, it worked or it didn't work. It worked for a little while, and then it became an entitlement, and it never, the dreams of it never really worked out. Can you comment on that? As far as why you think it's so important?
Yeah, the people who say that will also probably tell you there was a time it worked. It worked for a month or 2 or 6 months, and then something went wrong. Something wasn't right. People weren't happy. They wanted equality, whatever, and it got off track. If you can keep your bonus on track with staff pulling in harness, you can put an associate in there and they will drag him or her to production per patient very close to what the owner can do. And the staff, though they may not get him to charm the patients like the owner does, they can do the charming when they're incentivized. And we have what we call team referrals. So when you can put your focus on a leadership team and then bring in the rest of the staff, train them best you can, and get these leaders inspiring their team. They've got to do this too. They can't let themselves be trapped and drugged down into the mud, trying to lead and work. They can't be doers. They got to be leaders, where they can't be answering the phone, collecting money and making financial arrangements and trying to lead. Maybe for a time when you start, but quickly they need to rise up to full leadership status. This is how you're going to achieve AWOL. It's how we do it at Whitehall. At Whitehall, we take staff, some of which you were probably thinking of getting rid of, and we work with them, and some of them make pretty darn good leaders. There's almost always an argument going on with staff. Let me explain. The staff say the problem actually is the owner doctor.
Yeah.
The owner doctor says the problem is actually the staff. And we don't leave it there. We get to the bottom of it. As often as not, it is the staff or it is the owner doctor, but we get that cleared up. And it's amazing. A staff person you've given up on was probably because they gave up on you. They thought you would never show up on time. You'd never be on time between patients. You'll never give the raises you promised. In other words, they gave up on you, so you tend to give up on them. Right. So we kind of wind the clock back and take a new look at that.
What about with these new staff members, that you're talking about? So many of our doctors out there are facing, the turnover is amazing. It's just shocking levels of turnover. Are you seeing that this process takes longer put together and to create this structure in offices that have kind of a mediocre team?
That's a good question. I see 2 issues. One is the kind of money we paid before, kind of raises, all of that, no longer is adequate. The shortage of staff is so great that most doctors have not wrapped their mind around how far staff expectations of pay have jumped. Right. Number 2, how we treat staff. there's a tendency to put our focus in dentistry on patients because we see them as writing the checks. Well, there's not going to be many checks written if we can't finally get our staff tied into this process. We need to get them engaged, liking the job, feeling appreciated, and you got to be more conscious of these things than you were before. So the old way we did things, we had staff that had been with us for years, and we just we were on autopilot as much as they were. With the new teams, they're undertrained and they're underloved. They're wondering, have I come to the right place? We've got to show them that we value them, that they're appreciated here. And we got to pay them the competitive rate, which has changed so much that you almost wonder if you're still in dentistry.
Right.
So yeah, it's in that way, it's a new world. But the people that we work with that are doing that, it's the same world. It still works. The profitability is still great.
So you've not seen any diminishment of profit over the last couple of years as staff costs have gone up and even.
Oh, we have people that limp in the door at Whitehall. They have no profit. They're down on patients. Their method of getting new patients was referral based, and now they don't have enough good staff to inspire a referral. Patients leave the office frustrated and angry, and so they're back and forth between more expensive marketing and maybe I should show bigger cases, maybe I should push harder. In other words, and they end up literally with their practice failing. They literally are losing their profit, not just their profitability, no profit. And so to put that back together, it starts by getting the leaders named, getting them trained up, and starting to trust them. If you have people that you know without any doubt you can't trust, well, okay, maybe you need to look elsewhere.
Right. You talked about getting leaders trained up. What areas do you tend to focus on when you get a leader? Is this somebody that you're looking for them to? You talked about a growth engineer, somebody that really understands how a practice comes together to make a great month, to create profit, so that, I just came off with somebody that they had, I wouldn't say a bad month, but they were off by 15,000 and they're hoping to do 200. So they're off a little bit, but nothing major. And we looked at it, couple little errors in patient flow, new patients coming in, hygiene coordination wasn't quite perfectly, and you could just see it right there on the paper why it happened, and had nothing to do with case acceptance. What other things are you training these people up on other than kind of the basics of putting together a month?
Well, we see different levels of leadership. One level is we call practice managers. They can unstick the copy machine and they can answer the phone of people looking for work. They can do just some functional things. Then we have what we call clinic administrators, and they oversee a team, keep people working, keep people engaged. Finally, the growth engineer level, they know how to train each person in the office at the highest level of evolution. For example, you mentioned collecting money. Well, growth engineer is a person I send in who can collect on big cases, $20,000 and $30,000, and she can teach other people the subtleties, the nuance, and how to set it up. She's a person who knows that when you get into the marketing game, you're spending money. When that phone rings, somebody better pick it up on the first ring. They better talk a certain way, and don't put that receiver down until they've scheduled. Until that person shows up, you don't breathe easy. In other words, a growth engineer is the highest evolution of practice manager. You take the owner out of the picture, in some cases, she'll actually make the practice grow bigger. I know in Whitehall, Dr. Peterson has had a couple cases where he has leaders that really, they're not dentists, but they can in leadership ways, outshine the owner doctor.
Right,
And
right.
it's really a wonderful thing because that's a doctor who gets the privilege of doing what associates do. Goes home at night and forgets about the practice. On the weekend, forgets about the practice. You know, if you think about it, Wes, that was the dream, and some people are living it. They go home at night and know the practice is, not only is the practice running, but somebody's worrying about hitting goals. Somebody's worrying about patients, you know, writing good reviews, and they're worried about all those things as if it was their own practice. And when that's a staff person, you're a fortunate doctor.
How long does that take, to evolve to that level where the practice is really running without you, without your real effort, mental strain to make sure that everything's running correctly?
If
How long
you
does
get
that-
the right persons, and you pay them right, pay them enough and pay them in the right way, not just a big old check, but if you
Like a
pay them in
bonus.
the right way,
Uh-huh.
I would say 4 to 6 months would be the outside of what it would take to whip that practice up. We had a practice in Louisiana. There was a leader, you would have thought she was a dentist. She knew so much about dentistry. And, I don't even think she'd been a chairside or a hygienist, but she could move the associates around and really get their attention and put the fire in them. She really got them going. And so when you get this, you pay for it. And to that person, you got to realize, to that staff person being that leader, it's a high calling. She's probably making 100,000 a year, but she's got to practice doing 550,000 a month
Right.
with associates and owners that just hit a glancing blow off the practice every few weeks.
And what if I'm sitting here with no real leadership potential, maybe, but looking like I might have to go find somebody on the outside? What's that process look like now
Oh,
with this hiring dilemma?
that's a good question because there's other things like this. For example, if you told me you were interested in becoming a sedation dentist or a cosmetic dentist or there'd be months of training, certification, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing with getting AWOL is like seeking sedation or cosmetics. It's something you have to find, sort through the people, find somebody who buys into your vision, get the bonuses right, and put it together. Ultimately, they do well when they can pick their own people that are under them. We have
Yeah.
a tendency to have our favorites as dentists.
Right.
And I'm not saying you can't have favorites, but ultimately, to make it run with you gone, everybody's got to be engaged, got to be behind this leader.
So if you had to guess, how long would it take somebody that's
6
kind of
months, 6 months max from the time you find one. It might take you 3 months to find them, but
okay,
another 3 to 6 to set it
put it all
all up.
together? Okay,
Mhm.
great. And if somebody wanted to learn more, like if they're actually thinking about this, maybe they're mulling this over. I know a lot of people have followed us in the past and thought about doing this, came to seminars, maybe didn't pull the trigger on it, but maybe they're ready now, or think they're potentially be ready. What would you say, what would be their next step to learning more?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that for them to call up and talk to us about their goals. For example, it's not uncommon for somebody in their late 50s, late 60s, they've got some grandkids across the country, and it's just hit them. They want to be there. They want to go there. I would say, if that's you, if you really want the freedom from your practice and are willing to pay the price, and that price is the months it takes to find this leader, to get her trained up, get your bonus working, and you'll see it. You'll know it's working, Wes, when you almost feel like they're dragging you toward bigger production. In fact, I have doctors who have called and complained, and I said, well, how do you want it? Do you want to drag them, or do you want them dragging you? The next step would be to call us, tell us about your goals, tell us about your timing. Because like Wes said, 3 to 6 months, and this can all be yours. It can. Now, notice I said there's a price tag. You've got to pay these staff. You've got to treat them a little better than you did, a little bit more conscious, and you've got to pay them probably noticeably better. But you can produce well through associates, and you can get out of Dodge for weeks and weeks at a time. So if you want to do that, get on our schedule. And you're thinking maybe that this is a pitch to get you to join our coaching program. People join our coaching program voluntarily. We don't push them. In a way, they kind of have to push us because we have maybe 2 or 3 more openings. We want people who let me give you an example of a bad client. Keeps giving us bad leaders who show up once or twice a week, their relatives. In other words, they give us all kind of problems. If you think you can give us some good leaders and you can follow directions, you can be free of your practice, but not free of the money. That is, you can have the income
Right.
In the foreseeable future. So get on our schedule and let's talk about it.
All right. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week for our next topic.
Thank you.